I thought menopause made me invisible, but it turns out my husband was actively erasing me from existence. The birthday card sat on my kitchen counter like a slap across the face. Pink glitter letters spelling out, "Happy 53rd birthday. Menopause made you invisible, but at least you're still here." Inside, in my husband's familiar handwriting, "To my disappearing wife, love, David." I stared at those words until they blurred. 26 years of marriage, and this was his idea of humor. I'd been struggling with hot flashes, mood swings, and yes, feeling less visible in a world obsessed with youth. But hearing it from the man who promised to love me in sickness and in health felt like a knife twisting in an already tender wound. What I didn't know then was that this cruel joke was just the tip of an iceberg that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. The card wasn't random cruelty. It was a calculated move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. A game where the prize was my entire existence, and I was losing without even realizing I was a contestant. As I stood there, mascara running down my cheeks, I had no idea that within weeks I'd discover the truth. I wasn't becoming invisible because of menopause. I was disappearing because my husband was systematically erasing me, one document at a time, preparing for my complete elimination from our shared life. The birthday card was his confession. I just didn't know how to read it yet. My name is Margaret, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. David and I met in our late 20s at a law firm where I worked as a paralegal and he was a junior associate. I was the organized one who kept his cases straight, and he was the charming one who could talk his way out of anything. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I believed. We built what I thought was a beautiful life together. David climbed the ranks to become a partner, while I transitioned to managing our real estate investments, properties we'd accumulated over 2 decades of careful planning. I handled the paperwork, the tenants, the maintenance schedules. David always joked that I was the behind-the-scenes genius, while he was the front man. I took pride in being his anchor, his steady foundation. Our home was my sanctuary, a Victorian we'd restored together in an upscale neighborhood. Every room told the story of our partnership: the kitchen where I'd perfected recipes for his business dinners, the office where I'd organized his case files, the garden where we'd planned to grow old together. We never had children, which used to sadden me, but David convinced me we were enough for each other. I thought we were happy. David was attentive, always complimenting my cooking, praising my organizational skills, telling colleagues how lucky he was to have such a supportive wife. He'd bring me flowers on random Tuesdays, plan surprise weekend getaways, and hold my hand during movies. From the outside, we were the couple everyone envied. But looking back now, I see the signs I missed. How he'd always handle the important financial documents himself. How he'd insist on being the primary contact for our accountant, our insurance agent, our investment advisor. "You do so much already, honey," he'd say. "Let me handle the boring stuff." I thought he was being considerate. When menopause hit 2 years ago, everything shifted. The hot flashes were manageable, but the emotional turbulence caught me off guard. I'd cry during commercials, snap at David over trivial things, then apologize profusely. I felt like I was losing myself, becoming someone I didn't recognize. My confidence, once unshakable, crumbled like old paper. David seemed understanding at first. He'd rub my shoulders during particularly bad nights, bring me herbal tea, suggest I take it easy. But gradually his patience wore thin. He'd sigh when I forgot things, make little comments about my mood swings, suggest I might want to talk to someone about my issues. I started avoiding social situations because I felt awkward and out of place. The wives of David's colleagues seemed so polished, so put together, while I felt like I was falling apart. David would go to firm events alone, explaining that I wasn't feeling well, or was taking some time for herself. I appreciated his protection of my privacy, not realizing he was actually isolating me. The birthday card incident happened after a particularly difficult week. I'd been emotional about our upcoming anniversary, nostalgic about our early years, questioning whether I was still the woman David fell in love with. I'd asked him directly, "Do you still find me attractive? Do you still see me?" His response was to laugh and say I was being dramatic and hormonal. So when I found that card, it felt like confirmation of my worst fears. I was disappearing, becoming irrelevant, turning into one of those invisible middle-aged women I'd pitied in grocery stores. The card seemed like David's way of acknowledging what we both knew, but had been too polite to say out loud. I spent that entire day crying, convinced that my marriage was over, that I'd become a burden David tolerated rather than a partner he cherished. I felt pathetic, desperate, and utterly alone. The woman who'd once managed million-dollar property deals now couldn't even manage her own emotions. What I didn't realize was that my emotional vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was exactly what David had been counting on. But everything started to unravel the day I decided to surprise David with a romantic dinner for our anniversary. I'd spent the morning at our bank, trying to transfer money from our joint savings to pay for catering from his favorite restaurant. It was going to be perfect, just the two of us, recreating our first anniversary dinner. I wanted to prove I was still the thoughtful, capable woman he'd married, not the emotional wreck I'd become. The bank teller, a young woman named Jessica, whom I'd known for years, looked confused when I presented my ID and account information. She typed something, frowned, typed again, then excused herself to speak with her manager. When she returned, her expression was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry, but it appears your access to this account has been modified. You'll need to speak with Mr. Patterson about any transactions." Modified? I'd been managing our finances for over 20 years. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "This is our joint account. I've been using it for decades." Jessica's eyes filled with sympathy. "I understand your confusion, ma'am. Perhaps there's been some miscommunication at home. These changes were made about 6 months ago." 6 months ago. Right around the time my menopause symptoms had peaked, when I'd been at my most vulnerable and distracted. I drove home in a daze, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. There had to be an explanation. David would clear this up. When I confronted him that evening, David's reaction was perfectly calibrated, just the right amount of surprise mixed with gentle condescension. "Oh, honey, don't you remember? We discussed this when you were having those really bad episodes. You were so stressed about managing everything, and I thought it would help if I took some of the financial pressure off your shoulders." I stared at him, searching my memory. Had we discussed this? The past year was a blur of hormonal chaos and emotional upheaval. Maybe I had agreed to something and forgotten. Maybe my mind was more fractured than I'd realized. "But I don't remember agreeing to lose access completely," I said weakly. David moved closer, his voice taking on that soothing tone he'd perfected over the years. "Margaret, sweetheart, you've been under so much stress. Remember how you cried for 3 hours because you couldn't balance the checkbook that one time? I was trying to protect you from that kind of pressure." The gaslighting was so subtle, so expertly delivered, that I almost believed him. Almost. But something nagged at me. A small voice that whispered this wasn't right, that the woman who'd managed complex real estate transactions wouldn't simply forget signing away her financial autonomy. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, while David slept peacefully beside me. I started mentally cataloging other small changes I'd noticed but dismissed. How our mail had been redirected to David's office for security reasons. How our insurance agent now only spoke to David directly. How I'd been gradually excluded from conversations with our accountant because David said my emotional state might complicate tax discussions. The next morning, I called our property management company, the business I'd built from scratch to handle our real estate portfolio. The receptionist, someone I'd worked with for 15 years, sounded uncomfortable when I asked about our upcoming property tax payments. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry, but Mr. Patterson asked us to direct all communications through him now. He said you were taking a step back from business operations." Taking a step back? I'd never agreed to any such thing. These properties were my babies, my pride and joy. I'd found them, negotiated the purchases, managed every renovation, screened every tenant. They represented 20 years of my expertise and hard work. "When did this change happen?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "About 4 months ago, ma'am." Mr. Patterson said you needed to focus on your health. 4 months ago, another piece of my life quietly transferred away while I'd been drowning in hormonal chaos, too distracted by my own emotional turmoil to notice my world being systematically dismantled. That evening I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd cried over the birthday card just weeks earlier, and realized that my invisibility wasn't a natural consequence of aging. It was an engineered disappearance, carefully orchestrated by the man who'd promised to love and protect me. The question was, how much of my life had already vanished, and what was David planning to do with what remained? The investigation began innocently enough, or so I told myself. I started by organizing our home office, something I'd neglected during my worst menopausal months. David was at the firm, and I had the whole day to clean up, as I'd casually mentioned at breakfast. What I found in his locked filing cabinet, the key hidden behind a family photo, made my blood run cold. Folder after folder of documents I'd never seen. Property deeds with only David's name. Bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Insurance policies where I'd been removed as beneficiary. But the most chilling discovery was a manila envelope labeled Margaret Medical Documentation. Inside were copies of my medical records, including notes from my gynecologist about my menopausal symptoms. But these weren't just records. They were annotated in David's handwriting. Words like severe depression, cognitive decline, and emotional instability were highlighted and underlined. In the margins, he'd written notes, use for competency hearing, and Dr. Williams agrees, significant mental deterioration. My hands shook as I photographed everything with my phone. There were emails between David and our family doctor discussing my declining mental state and the necessity of protective measures. Dr. Williams, whom I'd trusted for 15 years, had been feeding David information about my private sessions, my struggles with menopause, my moments of vulnerability. But the worst discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the pile was a draft document titled Petition for Guardianship Due to Mental Incapacity. David was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. The petition cited my severe menopausal depression, my inability to manage financial affairs, and my increasing paranoia and emotional outbursts. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by evidence of my own planned destruction, and felt something shift inside me. The self-doubt that had plagued me for months crystallized into cold, hard fury. This wasn't about menopause making me invisible. This was about David making me disappear so completely that I'd have no legal right to exist independently. That evening, I played the perfect wife. I cooked David's favorite meal, asked about his day, smiled when he complimented my improved mood, all while knowing he was planning to have me declared insane. "You seem better lately," he said, cutting into his steak. "More like your old self." "I've been thinking about what you said," I replied carefully. "About taking things easier, letting you handle the stressful stuff. Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been trying to do too much." David's eyes lit up with what I now recognized as predatory satisfaction. "I'm so glad you're seeing it that way, sweetheart. I've been worried about you. We both know how difficult things have been." Over the following weeks, I became a master of deception. I played the grateful, slightly confused wife who was relieved to have her capable husband take control. I asked him to help me understand our finances, to explain why I couldn't access certain accounts. Each conversation was recorded on my phone, hidden in my purse. David grew bolder, more confident in his narrative. He started mentioning my episodes to friends, describing how challenging it had been to watch me deteriorate. He spoke with the practiced concern of a devoted husband bearing a difficult burden. "Margaret's been struggling," I heard him tell his law partner during a dinner party at our house. "The menopause has been really hard on her mentally. I'm trying to protect her from too much stress, you know? She gets confused easily now." I smiled and nodded from across the room, playing the part of the addled wife while secretly recording every word. Each lie he told, each sympathetic nod from our friends, each pitying glance in my direction, it all became evidence in my growing case file. The most painful moment came when David's sister visited for the weekend. I overheard them talking in the garden, David's voice carrying through the open window. I don't know how much longer I can do this, Sarah. She's not the woman I married. Sometimes I think it would be kinder to everyone if she were somewhere she could get proper care. Somewhere she could get proper care. A facility. He was planning to have me institutionalized. That night I lay in bed next to my husband of 26 years and planned his destruction. The moment of truth came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 3 months after the birthday card incident. David had scheduled what he told me was a routine meeting with our family lawyer to update our estate planning. What he didn't know was that I'd already met with the lawyer, a different one, and knew exactly what David's real agenda was. I dressed carefully that morning, a conservative navy suit that made me look competent and professional, minimal makeup, my hair styled in the no-nonsense way I'd worn it during my paralegal days. I wanted to look like the sharp, capable woman I'd always been, not the confused, emotional wreck David had been painting me as. The meeting was in David's law firm's conference room. Present were David, his law partner James Morrison, who was also serving as his personal attorney, Dr. Williams, and, to David's visible surprise, my own attorney, Patricia Chen, one of the city's most respected family law practitioners. "Margaret," David said, his voice carefully modulated with concern, "I wasn't expecting you to bring additional representation. This is just a routine estate planning meeting." "Is it?" I asked, placing a thick folder on the conference table. "Because according to the documents I found in your office, this meeting is about having me declared mentally incompetent so you can assume guardianship of my person and property." The color drained from David's face. Dr. Williams shifted uncomfortably in his chair. James Morrison's expression went from confused to alarmed as he realized what was happening. "Margaret, sweetheart," David began, his voice taking on that familiar, soothing tone. "You're having one of your episodes. You're confused about—" "Am I?" I interrupted, opening my folder. "Let me read from your own notes, David. Subject shows increasing signs of cognitive decline. Recommend accelerating timeline for a guardianship petition. Dr. Williams confirms severe depression and emotional instability make her unfit for independent decision-making." I looked directly at Dr. Williams, who couldn't meet my eyes. "Doctor, would you like to explain why you've been sharing confidential information about my medical care with my husband? Information that he's been using to build a case for my mental incompetence." I thought I was helping," Dr. Williams stammered. "David was concerned about your well-being, and as your husband, he has a right to—" "Actually, he doesn't," Patricia Chen interjected smoothly. "What you've been doing constitutes a massive violation of doctor-patient confidentiality. We'll be filing complaints with the medical board." David tried to regain control. "This is ridiculous. Margaret, you're proving my point right now. This paranoid behavior, these wild accusations—" "Wild accusations?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "Would you like to hear the recording of you telling your sister that it would be kinder to everyone if I were in a facility? Or perhaps the conversation where you told James that my mental deterioration was accelerating and you needed to protect the assets?" The silence in the room was deafening. David's face had gone from pale to ashen. James Morrison was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how to distance himself from this disaster. "You see, gentlemen," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "while you were all conspiring to have me declared insane, I was doing what I've always done best, gathering evidence and building a case. Patricia, would you like to share what we've discovered?" Patricia opened her own folder. "Over the past 6 months, Mr. Patterson has systematically transferred assets from joint accounts to accounts in his name only. He's removed his wife from property deeds, insurance policies, and investment accounts. He's been working with Dr. Williams to create a medical record that supports a claim of mental incompetence, and he's been coordinating with his law partner to file guardianship papers that would give him complete control over his wife's person and property." She paused for effect. "What Mr. Patterson didn't realize is that his wife has been documenting everything. We have recordings, photographs of documents, bank records, and witness statements. We also have evidence that this isn't the first time Mr. Patterson has engaged in this behavior. David's head snapped up. What do you mean? I smiled for the first time in months. A real, genuine smile. Did you think I wouldn't find out about Linda, David? Your first wife, who died in that convenient car accident after you'd taken control of her finances. The wife who'd been declared mentally incompetent just 6 months before her death. The room erupted. David shot to his feet, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You can't prove anything about Linda. That was 28 years ago. Actually, I can. Linda's sister has been waiting decades for someone to ask the right questions. Turns out, Linda had been telling people she was afraid of you right before she died. She'd been trying to regain control of her finances just like I am now. David's face was a mask of rage and panic. The charming, concerned husband had vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. You have no idea what you're doing, Margaret. No idea what you're risking. I stood up, gathering my papers. I know exactly what I'm doing, David. I'm taking my life back. The aftermath was swift and devastating. For David, within 48 hours of our confrontation, Patricia had filed for an emergency restraining order and initiated divorce proceedings. The evidence we'd gathered was overwhelming. Financial fraud, conspiracy to commit guardianship abuse, medical privacy violations, and most damning of all, new evidence in Linda's death that had prompted the police to reopen a 28-year-old case. David's law firm moved quickly to distance themselves from the scandal. James Morrison, facing potential disbarment for his role in the conspiracy, turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Dr. Williams lost his medical license and faced criminal charges for violating patient confidentiality laws. But the most satisfying moment came when David finally broke. It happened during our second mediation session, when the full scope of his financial crimes became clear. He'd stolen over $2.3 million from our joint assets, money that represented decades of my work managing our real estate portfolio. When Patricia presented the evidence, bank transfers, forged documents, fraudulent property sales, David's lawyer quietly advised him that he was facing serious federal charges. That's when the man who'd spent months gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind completely fell apart. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking as he looked directly at me for the first time since our confrontation. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just moving some money around to protect it from your episodes. But then you got worse, and I panicked. Worse? I asked quietly. Or more inconvenient? Both, the word exploded out of him. You were falling apart, Margaret. Crying all the time, forgetting things, questioning everything. I thought if I could just take control, manage things until you got better. And Linda? Patricia asked. Was she also just falling apart? David's face crumpled. For the first time in our 26-year marriage, I saw him cry real tears, not the calculated emotional displays he'd used to manipulate me, but genuine ugly sobs of a man facing the destruction of everything he'd built. Linda was different, he whispered. She was going to leave me, take half of everything I'd worked for. I couldn't let that happen. But with you, Margaret, I swear I thought I was helping. When you started having problems, I saw an opportunity to protect our assets. Yes, but also to protect you from the stress of managing everything. By having me declared insane? By taking care of you? His voice rose again, desperate now. You would have been comfortable, safe. I would have visited every week. You would have had the best care. In an institution while you lived in our house with your next victim. The question hung in the air like a blade. David's silence was answer enough. What struck me most wasn't his confession. I'd already known the truth. It was seeing him reduced to this pathetic, broken man who'd convinced himself that his elaborate scheme was somehow an act of love. The master manipulator had become so lost in his own lies that he'd started believing them. I loved you, he said finally, his voice barely audible. I still love you. Everything I did because I couldn't bear to lose you completely. You never loved me, David, I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. You loved controlling me. You loved having a competent woman manage your life while you took credit for everything. When menopause made me vulnerable, you saw an opportunity to take everything I'd built and make it yours permanently. That's not true. It is true. And the saddest part is that if you'd just been honest with me about your fears, if you'd supported me through menopause instead of exploiting it, we might have worked through this together. But you chose to destroy me instead. The mediation ended with David agreeing to a settlement that returned every stolen asset, plus damages. He would plead guilty to financial fraud and conspiracy charges, avoiding a lengthy trial but facing significant prison time. His law license was suspended pending the outcome of his criminal case. But perhaps the most poetic justice came from an unexpected source. Linda's sister, emboldened by our case, had convinced the district attorney to pursue murder charges in Linda's death. New forensic evidence suggested her car accident might not have been so accidental after all. As we left the mediation, David grabbed my arm, gently, desperately. "Margaret, please. 26 years has to count for something. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." I looked at this man who'd shared my bed, my dreams, my life for over 2 decades. The man who'd planned to erase my very existence while convincing me it was for my own good. "David," I said softly, "the man I loved never existed. You've been playing a role so long you forgot who you really are. I hope prison gives you time to figure that out." I walked away from my marriage, my old life, and the man who'd tried to make me disappear. For the first time in years, I felt completely, powerfully visible. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my new apartment, a beautiful loft downtown that I bought with my own money, in my own name, with my own credit. It's smaller than the house David and I shared, but every square inch belongs to me. The morning light streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I've never felt more seen. David was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for financial fraud and conspiracy. The murder charges in Linda's case are still pending, but the evidence is strong. Her sister and I have become unlikely friends, bonded by our shared experience of loving men who saw us as obstacles to overcome rather than partners to cherish. The most profound change isn't in my circumstances. It's in how I see myself. For months, I'd believed that menopause was making me invisible, that my value as a woman was diminishing with my estrogen levels. I'd internalized society's message that women over 50 become irrelevant, forgettable, disposable. What I learned is that my visibility was never dependent on my hormones, my appearance, or my age. It was stolen by someone who benefited from my self-doubt, who weaponized my vulnerability against me. The woman who'd managed million-dollar real estate deals didn't suddenly become incompetent because she started having hot flashes. She was systematically undermined by someone she trusted. I've returned to work in real estate, but now I specialize in helping women protect their assets during major life transitions. Divorce, widowhood, illness, these vulnerable moments when predators circle, looking for opportunities to exploit confusion and grief. My experience with David taught me to recognize the signs, the gradual isolation, the helpful taking over of responsibilities, the subtle undermining of confidence and competence. The response to my story has been overwhelming. When I first shared it online, I expected maybe a few supportive comments. Instead, I received hundreds of messages from women who'd experienced similar situations. Women whose husbands had hidden assets during divorce proceedings. Women whose adult children had convinced them to sign over power of attorney for their own protection. Women who'd been gaslit into believing their menopause symptoms meant they were losing their minds. One message particularly stayed with me. A 58-year-old woman wrote, "I thought I was going crazy. My husband keeps telling me I'm forgetting conversations we never had, agreements I never made. Reading your story made me realize I'm not losing my mind. I'm being manipulated. Thank you for giving me permission to trust myself again." That's the real crime in what David did. Not just the financial theft, but the theft of my confidence in my own perceptions. Gaslighting is insidious because it makes you complicit in your own erasure. You start questioning everything, your memory, your judgment, your worth. You become so focused on proving you're not crazy that you stop noticing the evidence that someone else is driving you there. I've learned that menopause doesn't make women invisible. Society's discomfort with aging women does. We're taught to apologize for taking up space, to be grateful for any attention, to accept diminished expectations as natural consequences of biology. But there's nothing natural about disappearing. Visibility is a choice, a daily decision to show up fully in your own life. My hot flashes haven't stopped. I still have days when my emotions feel too big for my body, but I no longer see these as signs of weakness or decline. They're evidence that I'm alive, that I'm changing, that I'm becoming something new. The woman I am at 53 is different from who I was at 27 when I married David. She's stronger, wiser, less willing to compromise her truths for someone else's comfort. To the women reading this who see themselves in my story, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone is trying to convince you that your perceptions are unreliable, that's often because your perceptions are threatening their agenda. Document everything, take pictures, make copies, trust yourself enough to investigate when things don't add up. And to the women going through menopause who feel like they're disappearing, you're not. You're transforming. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning. The world might try to convince you that your value diminishes with your fertility, but that's a lie designed to keep you small and manageable. You have decades of life ahead of you. Make them count. I'm 53 years old, post-menopausal, and more visible than I've ever been. I own my home, control my finances, and make my own decisions. I'm dating again, carefully, with clear boundaries and separate bank accounts. I've learned that love doesn't require surrender of self, and partnership doesn't mean giving up power. The birthday card that started this nightmare is framed on my wall now, not as a reminder of cruelty, but as evidence of survival. It reads, "Menopause made you invisible." Below it, I've added my own note. But I made myself seen again. Have you experienced financial manipulation or gaslighting in a relationship? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone, and we're definitely not crazy.